and welcome back to Love Sober, the podcast for the sober and sober curious. And today it's myself, and I'm welcoming back such a special guest. She's one of my, I think, even though we've never met, you must be one of my favourite human beings on the planet.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel like we've met because we've met over video so much, right?
I know, it's really weird. I better introduce you, right? Because everyone's like, who is this amazing person, right? So it's Bex Weller, and we've had Bex on before, way back at the beginning, I think back on episode 29, and we are it's about 150 now. So,
Wow.
2 years later, so Mandy and I go, still bloody going on. But that's the thing with sobriety, right? It's like we were talking just before before I hit record, and it was like you said, the peeling the layers of the onion. It gets more and more interesting, doesn't it?
Yes, it sure does. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
exactly.
so I'm so delighted to speak to Bex. Bex has got a new book out. Bex is an author. She's a coach. She's a speaker. She founded the amazing Sexy Sobriety website course. She coaches women all around, the sort of the reality, but the positivity and wonderful sort of joy that can be had in sobriety. And I know she's just played a massive part in my sober journey, and she's got a new book out. And this is fantastic. This is called Chameleon. I'm going to hold it up because we are videoing this. So I've got Chameleon here. I love that cover. It's beautiful. But so I'm really, really wanting to dive in with you, Bex, to this kind of subject, which we just know is so fundamental for so many people within sobriety, why we drank, what we discovered when we got sober, this kind of, people pleasing, not being ourselves, authenticity, boundaries, all of that really juicy, nitty gritty stuff. And I want to dive into it with you.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Gosh, yes, there's so much to unpack about this topic, right?
Yeah. We'll start with, how are you? Let's start there. An easy question. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited to talk to you again.
Yeah, no, that not at all. And we're at different ends of the day, aren't we? Because it must be quite late for you.
Yeah, it's just after 5 p.m. in WA.
Oh, okay. So not too late. I was thinking, sort of 12 hours, but we're not really, are we? So it's morning for me. It's late afternoon for Bex. By the gods of, tech, we're able to speak, which is fabulous. So, okay. So Chameleon, for people that don't know you, just give us a brief synopsis of how you kind of got here.
Yes. So it was 7.5 years ago. It was actually 8 years ago that I was in the corporate world. I'd been studying to be a health coach with no intention of actually becoming a health coach, but I just thought that it would be quite interesting to share healthy recipes on my little food blog that I had at the time. And lo and behold, I got the idea into my head that I would become a health coach. So I launched into this, and I was about 6 months into this crazy journey of entrepreneurship when I realized that my drinking, that had always been problematic. It had always been a binge drinking type pattern. And when I was in the corporate world, there were lots of reasons, I thought, to drink a lot, which was, stressful month ends and never ending functions and events that were happening. And I realized when I stopped working in the corporate world that didn't magically go away. It wasn't just because I was in the corporate world that I had these drinking patterns. It was because I leaned on alcohol for all sorts of emotions. And I know that, we can all relate when we start to realize that it's not just that alcohol we believed was fun or the portal to fun, but also it very much was a way to alleviate different emotions that I didn't want to deal with. And the thing about starting a new business is there's a lot of new emotions. And I found myself couch drinking more. I call it sort of drinking on the couch at night to alleviate some anxiety. And I was 6 months into this life change when I sat down with one of my beautiful clients and I talked to her over Skype, and she said, when I feel lonely, I drink more. And I said, well, that's okay. And I was just horrified when I said it. It was just one of those moments of clarity where I was like, what am I doing? I want to embark on this new journey. I need to sort out this drinking problem. And so I embarked on this sobriety experiment because I wasn't sure that I could do it. So I was like, what if I just try a time period and see what happens? And what happened was, I felt more free and more peaceful and more healthy and happy than I ever could remember. And so I kept that journey going to now 7.5 years sober.
Yay, I can't believe it. We were talking, weren't we? 7.5 years, and
Yeah.
how and you were saying, gosh, can you remember back to how difficult it was in the
Mhm.
early days? And we were just having a bit of a chat about that, weren't we? And
Gosh,
um,
yes.
yeah, and what a
Even
seven.
the idea of like 7 weeks, it just that
Mm,
terrified me. I was
yeah,
absolutely gobsmacked at the concept of that. And I'd done 10 days before, but never longer than that. And so even getting to that point was just mind-boggling. So it gets easier with time and practice, as any skill does. With repetition, it becomes easier with time, but also, like you were saying before, it becomes more interesting. And I'm quite fascinated by that, like how many facets there are to the human
yeah.
beings, and what sort of underlies our different behaviors and emotions.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting because this is a slight tangent, but I'm always fascinated because I do yoga, and I've had a yoga. I mean, interestingly, the yoga started to really make sense to me once I was doing it sober. And I'm always amazed by yoga gives you whatever you need at the time. I always thought that, oh, you went to yoga to chill out. But actually, if you do some kind of class and you need to get some bit of fight on, or you need to relieve some stress, yoga can do that. You really get some shit out, excuse my French. And it seems to balance you up. And I was thinking that about sobriety as well. It seems to just be that, I know those early days are so tough, and then putting one foot in front of the other and building some of the building blocks that we need to support. That's not to belittle that at all. But it's almost like sobriety gives you what you need. It's just whatever,
Right.
it's like that, clearing that space for then you to show up in your life and then sort out whatever occurs.
Yes, the underlying issues, exactly. It allows
Mm,
that space for it. I often thought, oh, once I figure out my underlying issues, then the drinking will fall away. But it was the reverse. It was only when
yes.
I stopped drinking, then I had the space and the capacity to
Yes.
heal the other things.
So true. And even then, I went after I did a year sober. I had in my head, it was like, right, I've sorted out the issues, so now I'll be fine to drink again. So that's another thing. And it's like, no, it doesn't
Yes.
work like that. You basically have to get, look, the good news and the bad news is the booze just has to go. That's it. And then it all gets a lot better. Let's just stick with that. Keep it simple. Um,
Exactly. That's what I always thought about. If I don't need the alcohol, then why do I need it? Because whenever that of the beast in my head, I call it, or the wine witch, whenever that would pipe up and sort of say, "Oh, well, you've proven that you don't need to have alcohol, so you can just go back to drinking." And then I was like, "But hang on, if I don't need it, then what do I need it for?"
yeah.
It's just this constant evolution of like learning more about ourselves and feeling more comfortable with ourselves. I think they talk about it being a disease, like a dis-ease. You're not at
Yeah.
ease with yourself, and this is why we sort of need this to numb out, or to feel like we need it to fit in with others. And once you start to feel more relaxed with yourself, it's not that you don't need it, basically.
Yeah. 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 But it is so interesting how that voice can pop up. And I think,
Hmm.
I see people on sober forums, and they fit, and for myself as well. I remember going to Paris actually a few years back, and I was really disheartened because the wine witch popped up, and I suddenly had that kind of, oh man, I'm in Paris. Like people were around me you know, and smoking and drinking red wine, you know, in the morning. And like, I mean, that would actually be really rank, wouldn't it? That would really be horrible. But
You would
I
sure feel
suddenly
bad,
had that like, oh, you know, and it was like this morning, just for not very long before I, you know, my brain came back on board and I could challenge that. And when I got back, I remember posting on Soberistas at the time and just saying, feeling like that was a bit of a failure. Why am I still feeling that like that 2 years in? And my other really beautiful friend, she's in Australia actually, said, no, that's just the mind. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything. The fact is you didn't drink, so it don't make it mean anything. It's just they come and they go.
Exactly.
Don't have to attach a narrative to it. Just
No, that's right. Just be thought, and like you know, I always think about stopping drinking as ending a relationship in a way. And so, like, if you think about, sometimes your exes will pop into your head, and maybe you sort of feel a bit nostalgic for the time that you had with them before your logic kicks in and is like, oh, here's all the reasons that wasn't a great relationship, you know. So just like that, and it's not, doesn't mean you want to be back with them, but you were with them for a period of time and they had an impact on you.
Yeah, I love that. And you know what? One of the reasons why I love your work, I loved Sexy Sobriety when I did it. I loved A Happier Hour. I read your first book, and it was so, because you're so relatable and you make sense of things like that. And I can get very esoteric and start talking in some very strange language. And I love the fact that you bring it back to that relatability. And with that in mind, I want to segue into Chameleon, because it's so relatable and something that I think a lot of our listeners, the majority of our listeners, are women, and I think that it is such a big piece. It's a big piece for all of us, but very much for us ladies. So, can you tell me, like, what you know? Yeah, tell me about why you wrote it. Why did you write Chameleon?
I suppose I wrote it because when I first stopped drinking, I didn't realize that I had this people pleasing issue. I think what had happened when I was drinking is that I would say yes to things and then I would feel anxious about them because I didn't really want to go to them, or I would feel resentful because I said yes when I really meant no. But drinking was always an easy out to make me forget about it. You know, I had an uncomfortable emotion, anxiety, or a resentment, and so I drank it away. When I stopped drinking, suddenly I realized that all the times that I felt anxiety were around these times when I betrayed myself. And I think it's so interesting, but it's also very understandable because I had a long history of betraying myself. Even the promises I made to myself, where I'm not going to drink this week, but then I would, or I'm only going to have 2 drinks, but then I have 7. You know, it was breaking those promises over and over again. And I think not having a strong sense of self, like I didn't feel like I had my own back or I could trust myself. That meant that I was constantly giving away my I guess identity to others. I was putting my identity out there, hoping that others would validate it, love it, approve of it. And this really drove this, you know, at first I went to Dom, my business partner, and I said to him, these are the ideas that I want to write about. These are the, like, sort of next 4 books that I'm thinking about. And he looked at all the topics and he was like, no. And I was like, what do you mean no? And he was like, no, these are not the topics that you struggle with the most. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, people pleasing. He's like, you struggle with people pleasing. Whenever you are on the couch biting your nails, feeling anxiety, it's because you're scared to say no to something that you don't want to do, or someone has overstepped their mark and you don't know how to approach them about it. And I was like, but I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to write about that. And he's like, yeah, don't you think that's a sign that you probably should? And I was like, yes. And so, you know, it's such a funny thing because we don't like to think of ourselves as people pleasers, because it can seem like a sort of victim in a way. And, you know, I always like to think of myself as strong and capable and all this kind of thing. But as I started to peel back the layers and look at all the things that were included in this, that people pleasing is encompassed encompasses things like communication skills and conflict resolution, and all these kinds of skills in relating to others, and also while also not betraying ourselves, like very much feeling at ease with ourselves. And I was thinking about feeling relaxed as well, about within ourselves and in our relationships with others. And I was thinking about this because I was watching reruns of Jamie Oliver, the Naked Chef type things. And what struck me about them, besides the yummy food, was just how relaxed he was with himself. He's so relaxed in his conversations with others. And when I watched later, I guess, episodes or shows that he was in, and he was having conflict with school lunch organizers and so on, still, even if the other person was getting really aggro, he was still so relaxed and he didn't take it on board. And it just struck me that I didn't know how to do that. So all of this is a very long-winded way of saying is that this inspired me to really look beneath the hood and find out what was going on. And seeing it so often within Sexy Sobriety as well, with our members, and hearing that they were the things they struggled with, how to fit in when they don't drink anymore, what to say to people who have questions about them not drinking, how to deal with really tricky conversations or family situations without the crutch of alcohol.
So much, isn't it? And I guess, by the way, I love the fact that Jamie Oliver is like your guru. That's like amazing.
Chill Jamie.
I know. Bless his heart. He is awesome. But and I think the way that when you talk about all of those things, the word that pops into my head, but we'll meander back, is boundaries. Is that word boundaries for me. And I know that I used to hate that word because I had no idea what it meant. I didn't know where I stopped and other people started. I literally didn't. And whenever I would approach a boundary, that's when I would often drink, because I was so uncomfortable with saying no. And it was shoehorning myself into events that I didn't want to be in, staying longer at parties that I didn't want to be at, avoiding difficult feelings, avoiding difficult conversations. And those were all little not red flags, they were like flags back to me and back to what I needed. And I used to drink over those and think they were, because they felt uncomfortable, because I was never taught, I was never encouraged or actively discouraged to go, oh, that's what that feeling is, that's my no.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, how many years. Like, I literally didn't know what my no was till I was in my early 40s. And I was a mother of two by that point. I still didn't know what a no was. And I'm like, oh,
it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. And just, that sort of feeling like, when people used to say to me, just tune into your intuition, like go inside, listen to what your gut's saying. And I would nod along and pretend that I knew what they were talking about, but I had absolutely no idea. I couldn't hear my intuition. I didn't even know how to tap into that. Yeah. And, that I think when we have been betraying ourselves for such a long time, we don't listen to that voice within. And so then we seek approval from outside sources because we have no sense of self. We have no sort of inner self-worth and confidence and self-esteem and self-trust and all those beautiful things.
Yeah. So why don't we have a chat about how we have, not listened in, and how that might show up. We've mentioned a few. And then maybe we could explore how we start to do that and how that might look for people. So for me, I've mentioned, not leaving a party, and I do think there's going along to things. I mean, it was so, I remember you, because you talk about Amy Pearson in your book about the people pleasers, and trying to the three groups of people who we spend our time trying to convert, the haters and the neutrals who are just not our people, and we dull ourselves down so much, don't we, that our real people can't even see us, and we barely recognize ourselves. That spoke volumes to me. And that takes me right back to the school playground, school gates, trying to fit in with the school mums. And like literally, I don't know, I just felt invisible. I felt absolutely invisible. And that actually was really quite painful. It was painful trying to fit in. And they would invite me to drink. They wouldn't, because my son is neurodiverse. He has some extra needs. So we didn't know that at the time. So it was like we were a bit difficult, so we wouldn't get invited to play dates. But yet there'd be a mum, because they'd be thinking, oh, well, Kate is good for a laugh when, of an evening out. So we'll get her along for that. So I had this very, almost, a very clear example, I suppose, even though I couldn't see it at the time, that my needs weren't being met. I was not being supported as a family. I didn't have the village around my child or me at that point, and I was in a new town. And yet I was shoehorning myself into their little social group using wine, mummy wine culture. Now now I look back, I'm like, holy moly, that was horrible. What about, and so how has it shown up for you?
Oh my gosh, and I just want to say I'm so sorry you went through that. And I think that's such a common thing where we think, especially, like I just would never have questioned it before I stopped drinking. I would have been like, well, they invited me, so I should go. Always giving my power away to someone else, always being like, well, if they invited me, it's rude not to go. And I think what's underlying all of that is just that for me, it was very much a need to fit in, a need to please. Yeah. And these needs come up when we're children for a variety of reasons. And I think one of the reasons that mine came up is that I changed primary schools 3 times before I was 10. So it was a very effective way to fit in and find new friends. Oh, okay, the girls all wear these shoes, I'll wear these shoes. Oh, okay, the girls all like skip rope, I'll play skip rope. Very much a way to make fast friends before I changed primary schools again. And yes, that may have been a sort of a kind of effective coping mechanism in that situation as a child. But as we grow up, that pattern is so deeply ingrained, or that belief, that we find ourselves playing it out again and again and again. Yeah. And I found myself like I would never, even when I was drinking and I was invited to things, I always went. And even if my hangover was so bad that I had to throw up in the bathroom before I left for the event, I still went. Even I remember arriving at one and going straight to the ladies when I arrived at the event and throwing up in the bathroom there, and still staying out because they invited me and it would be rude not to. It's just, the mind boggles now, especially when I spent so much time worried about what others thought of me, never once considering whether I liked them. Yes. Never once stopping to be like, well, are we a good match? Do we have common interests? Are they supportive in other ways? Or do they just, like these school mums, did they just want me because it's like a fun thing? Like I'm the fun one, but they don't want to engage or invest in the relationship or give anything back. It's not a two-way street. And that, I think that it takes the stopping drinking to be able to have the clarity to be like, well, hang on a second, is this relationship working for both of us?
Yes. Yeah, so true. We don't have that clarity because, like we were talking about before, we're so used to, and often we start drinking as teenagers whilst we're developing our social skills. So many of us will be doing that. How many of us, when we discovered alcohol at 16, like it just felt like the magic elixir that made all of that difficult stuff around friendships go away. So it was like, okay, so yeah, I didn't get beyond that. I was like, okay, that's what we do. It's just how it goes. Yes, how we connect. And sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, and that's one of the biggest fears of people to stop drinking is, but how will I fit in then if I stop?
Yeah. And that feeling of it's such a big thing, isn't it? In we notice in our community and with clients that this how do I connect with other people is really big. And I also think there's something that happens, before we go on to talking about how we start that process of identifying what works and connecting with others and ourselves authentically. I think when we are struggling with alcohol as well towards the end of our relationship with it, because we live in what we call the normative drinking culture, where everyone drinks, we're looking outside. When we get onto shaky ground, we seek confirmation from outside, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
And then that gets even more confusing, and you lose even more agency in a way, because now I'm going, but it doesn't feel right for me. This is actually now feeling very wrong for me. However, everyone else seems to be fine. So what's wrong with me?
Yes.
And then forgetting 3 days later when the hangover's gone. Oh, don't be silly, because we're looking outside. So there's part of this, I think, where we're going is that, okay, let's stop looking outside and let's start looking in. Let's start asking those questions. So what's the next stage of this then? How do we've said, okay, we do need to put the bottle down, we do need to stop the drinking. What's the next step?
Probably, one of the things that I think was quite powerful in my journey, in particular, was having a dedication to actually looking within, like really starting to wanting to get in touch with that intuition that everyone spoke about, this magical thing that I'd never experienced. And I think the way that we do that is, for me, it started as a process of small things, like incremental things. It started with feeling proud of myself. And I really didn't have much experience with this because I'd done a lot of things I wasn't proud of, that's for sure, over many, many years, but not a lot that I was proud of. And often this was as simple as making my bed in the morning, or eating some fruit instead of chocolate, or just making a long-term decision. Well, obviously making your bed's not long-term, but making a decision that was healthy for me. It gave me this little boost where I was like, okay, I feel good about myself. I'm showing myself that I can take care of myself. Obviously, this is all, sort of the self-care things that we learn in early sobriety. But also, I started to boost my self-esteem. And I think the more we boost our self-esteem and we start to then think, okay, well, what am I actually into? Like, how can I get to know myself? Because to know ourselves is to then be able to tune into our intuition. So, okay, what do I actually enjoy? Like, there's a deep level of honesty that has to come with it, where it's not like, what did your friends say that you should enjoy? Or what does society show you that you should enjoy? No, what do you actually enjoy? What are some things? And trying a heap of different things and building on that. I think the more that we get to know ourselves and start to tune in to what makes us feel good and what makes us not feel good, we then can approach our other relationships as more of a fully formed person. We have more of a sense of self, and we're then less likely to let others steamroll us or push us into things that we don't want to, because we're like, no, hang on a second, that doesn't work for me. We've sort of done that inner work where we've uncovered who we are, what we actually enjoy, and we can then sort of start to really change, like that deep level of honesty with ourselves. We can then develop that in level of honesty with others, because I think there's so much sort of hiding and masking and so on that happens when we are constantly looking for outside approval. There's not a lot of honesty in the relationship. There's a lot of, like, for me, it felt like being a good actress, or if I wanted to go really dark about it, to think that perhaps I was trying to manipulate the other person into thinking I was a nice person, or to liking me. I always believed that being nice made me a good person. But when I started to think, what if it just made me a manipulative one, because I'm doing it in order to win their approval, their love, their appreciation. I'm not doing it to be honest with who I am and what's happening in our relationship. So I think that becoming really honest with ourselves, that can then sort of radiate outwards and lead to more honest relationships with others, which are then
Mm.
infinitely more rewarding because they're they're real. They're not
Yeah.
built on they're not built on two people sort of acting a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many points in there that I wanna jump on. But the things that as you were talking, I was making a couple of little notes because I have to do that now because I'm menopausal and I forget.
I love it.
Excellent, excellent. But there was something about, spotting. There's a few things: spotting evidence of ourselves, noticing ourselves showing up and looking after ourselves. So we're sort of building this case. It's like if we're lawyers, we're like building
Yes,
our case for the fact that we're all right, aren't we? We've heard
I
that.
love
No,
that. I
my
always
lord.
like to think of
Yeah.
yeah, it's like evidence,
It's
evidence that okay,
evidence.
I'm doing things.
I'm
You
doing
can't argue
okay.
with this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm doing okay. And I've showed up and I said I was going to do that and I did. And it is. It's like, okay. And it feels like there. I also get that sense of solid ground. I think when we start off, there's no solid ground. And there's something about this that's almost like stealth work. It's like I'm trying to feel like this, but I'm going to do it in a it actually happens by default if I do these other things. So I
Mm.
can't like think my way into doing this. I can't go, right, I'm really going to get good at boundaries almost. It's like I have to,
Yes.
but that will happen as an accident of me making my bed, of showing up, of it's like, oh, suddenly I've built one I didn't even know I was building. Oh,
Yes.
okay, I've got some solid ground,
Yeah.
and then I've got that little transferable skill to then go, I did that, so now I can do this. And that doing this might be going, actually, I don't want to go to that thing tonight.
Mhm.
And who
Because
knew?
you have
Yeah,
more
sorry, go on.
self-respect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you do, you have more self-respect. And then that feels more solid. And then you can
Yeah.
build more on that. And I love what you said. And that then the other bit of that you said about what if I'm actually trying to manipulate people? And when you said that, I was like, ooh, yeah, that's like, okay. So there's another part of this, and I think, like you said, there's a self-compassion piece. There's the big dose of self-love. For me, again, my start with it was your course, Sexy Sobriety, Sober Treats. It had to start outside in, just like, putting a nice colourful jumper on because I feel a bit tired, or, those little bits. And then it went inwards, because I think if we are doing that, that feels, yeah, how do we help ourselves when some of those bits come up, like you just said, maybe some of the difficult truths.
Yeah, exactly like you were saying, that self-compassion, because,
Mm.
I loved when I was thinking about this, like, does it make me a manipulative person? And I liked the sort of break there where instead of me believing that it was something to be proud, like almost proud of being this nice person who was very agreeable and obedient and would always do these things. Suddenly I was like, but what if it's not a good trait to be
Mm.
those things? What if honesty is way better? And having that compassion, because I was like, but in the past, I believed it was a way for me to connect with others. I believed that's how we gained love. It was very much done with a pure heart of,
Yeah.
but I want to be friends with you, but I want to be liked by you, all these kinds of things. But then if I could flip that switch and be like, okay, but wouldn't it be nicer and, well, yeah, I guess nicer, and also more honest, more trustworthy, more rewarding, more empowering if it was more of an honest relationship and I learnt how to say no in ways that felt good?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a much better, richer life than constantly pretending that I like things just in order to win approval or love? And so, really coming back to that self compassion of like, I did the best that I could
Yeah.
back then. That's the skills and the tools that I had. Unfortunately, the 10-year-old self had created a pattern that believed that this was the thing
Yeah.
to do. And now that I'm a woman, I can now start to look at, okay, how can I unlearn that? What are some behaviors that would serve me better than this constant trying to fit in with others?
Yeah, yeah, it's like unhooking, because your core value there was being kind and love in a sense, but it was like the wrong way of getting it. So unhooking from that, but going, oh, actually, but that this is the way that I am more aligned with my core value,
Yeah, and
with
isn't it
honesty.
kinder? Yeah, isn't it kinder
Yeah,
to be honest?
kinder to
And
be
you could still
honest.
say no in a way that brings you closer as well. And this is something
Mm,
that I talk about a lot in the book because it's something
yeah,
that was such a big learning curve for me, is how to resolve conflict in the way that brings us closer together. So I'm still getting what I really want, and that the relationship to be closer, but I'm not betraying myself in the process. I'm
yes.
being very honest, and I'm just approaching that conflict in a way that I hope, resolves to us being closer and more understanding of each other's quirks and uniqueness.
Yeah. So let's do that then, because that will be the next piece in it. It's like, okay, so I get this sense that now I want to say no, but when I say no, maybe I'm not used to it, so it's a really hard no. Okay, so
Mhm.
about finessing this skill, what would your what's your take, what are your tips for, yeah, this
My tips.
conflict resolution? How do we do it?
Exactly. And it's practice, right? It's practice.
Mm,
So what I do now is, especially if I'm having a conflict with a loved one, and I'm thinking about one that I had with a family member, and they'd done something that had really hurt me, but obviously they love me. They didn't want to do it on purpose. And so I was, instead of going in there with all guns blazing and being like, you did this, and fighting for my position as the biggest victim of, you hurt me the most, and so you're wrong. And I think, again, coming back to that honesty of, what do I actually want out of this conflict? Do I want to go in there and prove that I'm right, or to gain sympathy from them because it would make them feel guilty? What is the honest truth of what this confrontation will achieve? And instead thinking of those sorts of past behaviors, starting to look at, okay, what I want from this is for them to understand that what they did was really hurtful, and that in future, here's what I could do to make that situation not as difficult, and here's what they could do instead, and see if that aligns with their understanding.
mm,
And the first time I did this, gosh, I was scared. I was shaking. I had those sort of cold pins and needles. I wasn't sure if I needed to throw up or poo my pants. I was just like, oh God, what's going to happen? And I just stumbled on my words. And that was because I went in there, because I'd had the foresight to not go in there with all guns blazing, but because I had been like, okay, just go in there and this is what I really want from it. I approached it in a loving way. And they were so receptive as well. And so it was this process of us like coming to a new level of understanding. And they were like, I'm so glad that you brought this up with me, because for so long I had never said anything. And I think we believe that that means that we will be a more pleasant person to be around. But often when we never bring up any grievances or any sort of hurts and things like that, we come across as a very one-dimensional person. We don't
mm,
come across as a fully formed human in a way. And so,
mm.
they were very receptive, and we worked out a new way of, approaching these things going forward. And I think this coming back to this practicing, even when you feel like you're going to come out of your skin, even if you don't know what to say, each time you practice, you get a little better at it.
Mm.
And in the meantime, as you're working on your self-worth, your self-respect, your self-esteem, your self-confidence, you grow in that as well. And you start to look for, I think the more you do it, the more you start to look for opportunities of when to do it more, like how you could do it more, because you feel that new shift in the relationship paradigm where you're like, oh, we have reached a new level of understanding. This conflict has deepened our relationship, not driven them away. So it's brought us closer because we have a more honest understanding of where each other is coming from.
Mm.
And I think once we start to sort of shift that in our mind, as well as like, these conflicts don't mean that the relationship will end. In most cases, they mean that you'll reach a newer level of understanding and a deeper, more richer relationship.
Yeah, so it's like, it's so interesting, isn't it? And there's, the permission to even, bring ourselves to the table and allow that other person to bring themselves to the table. And you've just reminded me of a couple of things that I've read recently, and something that my children do at their school, which it was always to start with the I message. And the I message is, I'm feeling like this. So you show up with how you're feeling, and then that allows the other person to say, I'm feeling like this. So you both have the I message, which I really love. And then something that I was reading on, I can't remember if it was Tiny Buddha, about this conflict, and about, I think it's just sort of reflective listening, but it was a very easy sort of 1, 2, 3 about it. So to allow the other person to speak, and then it's so not to just mirror them verbatim, but so they're saying their piece. Like, this is my hard bit, where I'm like, because I never got a chance to speak as a kid, I'm like, me, I'm not going to get a chance to put my point across. And I get really, really like anxious at that point. So it's like, okay, to stay calm, and then try and in your head summarize what you think, distill what the message is that they're trying to say, and then say it back to them. So it's like, okay, it sounds like that's really difficult for you in that moment when I leave all the stuff in the sink. That actually really gets to you. And then that often helps to them to go, well, yeah, it's, so I found that quite interesting, that quite a good little tip of, because I would do that with clients, but I wouldn't necessarily do it in my relationships. You know what I mean? I just go full like, no, well, if you don't like it, you bloody sink. I'm not doing it. And then we end up in this kind of, not very happy place. And actually, if I just took a breath and was just like, okay, no.
And that so much of that as well comes back to, I think, once we uncover and start to like what's unique about ourselves and accept ourselves, I think we can have more compassion for others. Where for one person, dishes in the sink is so irritating, and for another person, they don't even notice it. I think that once we see those differences, and we see that we're all sort of very, very different, we can have more compassion for each other. And I love that. I love the repeating the message back to them, and very much going in there with the, I feel like this. Then you're allowing room for the apology as well. You're not sort of going in there and putting them on the defensive. You're saying, I feel like this, and then they can say, oh, okay, well, gosh, I didn't realize. It's very much a way to sort of open things up. And often when I was in school, I didn't have the guts to, well, actually even past school years, I didn't have the guts to approach people about these, friends or family members or anyone about these conflicts. And so I would often write things down. And I think even that, that can be a good way to practice, is writing down, when the person does this, I feel like this, and you can get very clear then. And sometimes that can help kind of having a script, or at least having notes about what you're actually upset about, because I can so relate to you there, Kate, about the rushing to get through things, because in work meetings and so on, I would always be the same, like I rushing because I wasn't sure how much time I would get. And I remember even when I started my own business, and I was on a radio interview, and I sort of rushed through it as fast as I could because I wasn't sure how long the segment was supposed to be. And afterwards, the radio host called me and said, next time we'd love to have you on again, but could you sort of tell a story, like why you just quickly ran and then disappeared? And I was like, oh, I wasn't sure how long the segment would be. And he was like, well, you're the guest, just tell the story, however long you want it to be. And I was like, oh my God, it was such a painful lesson of like, oh my gosh, of course, I'm so scared that I won't get to have my say, and that's why I've rushed through it. So I think that practicing patience and being relaxed and drawing it out as well is another skill set.
Yeah, for sure. And you said something really interesting about that. Not going in guns blazing. It's basically, if it's making me think that deep breath and that being able to calm ourselves and feel that solid ground as we approach. So that'll be some nervous system regulation, right? Yes. That'll be some self-talk. That'll be, I mean, there's a lot going on there, isn't there, in terms of managing our state to then be able to keep ourselves from being basically in a survival mode and triggering somebody else's survival mode. Because as soon as I'm angry or scared or everything, I'm going to be, you know, in the T-Rex rather than my best self, my most calm self. And that will be triggering for the other person. So we're really trying to kind of keep ourselves, we're trying to keep ourselves calm, aren't we? Yeah. And avoid escalation, I guess. Exactly. But what happens when, what happens when there is an escalation? How would you not, because I think my default mode used to be, if there was an escalation, I would go into kind of fawning, trying to fix, trying to kind of go, okay, if it's fine, how do I do that and not abandon myself if something has escalated?
I think allowing that space in there. So whether you sort of take a few slow breaths, whether you say, okay, I can see that you're getting quite upset. Like, why don't we table this? Why don't we come back to this later? And then you both walk away and you sort of have some time. Or you can even, like in the beginning, if you're just trying to figure it out, you can pretend that your phone's gone and you just go into the bathroom for a minute, calm yourself down. I think so much of that, some people as well, they have a pattern of getting louder or getting more aggressive if they are confronted about anything that they don't want to face, even if you go in there with the most love and compassion in the world. And so with those people, I think it's very much about sort of those deep breaths, allowing space, like taking time for yourself, and remembering that it's always okay to remove yourself from a conflict as well, and you can come back to it later. I think part of being nice and wanting to please others is feeling like we have to take whatever they throw at us, but we really don't. We can walk away. And this is something that I always found so fascinating when I used to watch the reality shows, because I mean, obviously so many of them are scripted as well, but I would watch them and so many of their reactions were so visceral, and I thought, no one's that good an actor, some of this stuff's real. And the ones that would scream over each other and they'd get more and more heated and it would get more escalate, the conflict went on for weeks. It really wasn't resolved. But the ones who could just hold their ground, breathe, slow down their responses, they're the ones who actually found some resolution. Even if the other person was a real hothead and went right off at the beginning, they would usually, because they witnessed the first person being so relaxed and calm and trying to slow things down, they would then, even if they threw a drink and stormed off, they would come back later and be more readily available to discuss it further or to make amends. And so, again, I think allowing space for that apology as well, and allowing space for them to come out of their survival mode, especially if that's where they've lived for a long time. They don't know how to regulate their own nervous system, having that compassion for them. But first of all, remembering that you can remove yourself. You don't have to stand there and take it. You can always come back to it later, when everyone's calmed down.
Yeah. We've got a code word. I love that. And it is so important in our household. We've got a code word called drop the rope. And it's like, okay, this is going up. We all need to drop the rope, and we need to, because it's like a tug of war, isn't it? Drop the rope, walk off, we'll come back later. And it's been essential. So I love that. I think that's so important, because I think it's almost like, if, for me, my biggest tool in terms of then doing something, default behavior, trying to fix, trying to people please, giving too much in a situation, always happens once I've become stressed. I've gone into that. And for me, just buying some time, and my son is very good at the drama, and he gets more pocket money when he's managed to create drama, because everyone's like, so You know, it's like he's a master of pushing the buttons. And my power statement, and I think this was probably my second year of sobriety, was I don't know. And I often say that now, because actually I often don't know what the right thing is, because it really takes me a long time to process what I might need, what this is. And I just need a bit of time to think about it. And once I sort of said, I don't know, I'll need to think about it, and then I walk off. That has proved that's such a useful boundary for me, and a tool as a people pleaser.
Yeah, I love that so much, because there are some people who are great at thinking on their feet, who can
Mm,
come up with solutions, bang, 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 bang. I am not one of them. I'm the
no.
same, so I completely relate, Kate. I need to like walk away. I need to have time to think about things, and to figure out what I actually feel about it, what was upsetting me about it, really digging deep into the conflict and why it's happening. So, I think also allowing that space for others, and I love that that's a self-protection mechanism. It's sort of saying, I'm coming back to this later, but just let me think about it. It's creating a lot of respect in the relationship as well, because then they have to respect that you're not going to react in that second,
Mm,
that they can't expect to just come to you and have you fix or have you react on their whim, that you
yes.
need time to think about it. And so you're creating that boundary in that relationship as well, where you're like, no, this is not how I process things, this is how I work. So I
Mm,
love you, but I need that time to think.
yeah. And you know, when we're saying it like now, I love it because we're having a really calm chat about it. It does make sense, doesn't it? It's like, it's just in that moment being able to go, it's almost like, yeah, power of the pause, put the brake on, then we got a chance to sort all the shit out.
Exactly, exactly. Think through it, logic. It's that, definitely that pausing before reacting. And one story I tell in the book was where I was working with a workmate, and he was a good friend for a long time, and he was behaving really in a terrible way. And he kept it going, and I didn't say anything because I wanted to be nice, I wanted to be a people pleaser. I didn't want conflict, I didn't want to say anything, until it got to a point where it was so bad that I stood up and just yelled at him. I roared across this open plan office floor and looked like a complete, nutcase in the meantime. And it's like I wouldn't have got to that point if I had have said something sooner.
Yeah,
So, I think we sometimes let these things fester until the point where we do react in a way that we're not proud of.
yeah,
So, building that self-esteem muscle as well, when we approach these conversations early and we practice and we try and get better at them, that again builds that self-esteem muscle, which then comes back to making us feel more confident to try it the next time. Like, it's a beautiful cycle that keeps perpetuating itself.
yeah, totally. The virtuous circle, isn't it? Or the virtuous spiral
Mm.
upwards rather than that horrible downward spiral of not doing. And I was just wondering, because I was thinking about putting you on the spot and to do a bit like a before and after, or like, so to give you a scenario and you give me the kind of people pleasing answer, and then the one with the boundary, the recovering people pleaser answer,
Mhm.
so that people listening in could say, oh, okay, that's something, but this is what I could do instead, right? So
Yeah.
okay, so something about a family member asks you to do something that you haven't really got time to do, but you've been used to doing it, and might be the first time you just say you can't. So what would you have done in the past, and then how would you have felt, and then what would you do
Mhm.
now?
Yes. So in the past, I would have always said yes, no matter what was happening in my life, no matter if I didn't have time or the resources or the ability, I would always say yes. And then I would feel resentment. This resentment would bubble up, where I would then moan about the person who had made the request. I would feel just like I didn't even want to see them. And often I would go through with the request, I would do it, but so begrudgingly. There was so much negative energy tied up with it. And I would then see them to show them that, okay, I completed the task that you wanted me to. And try and emanate that resentment towards them without saying anything, just this body language or this shutting down or this sort of, scowl on my face. Very much the behavior of a child when I think back now, because I wanted them to read my mind. I wanted them to know that I was pissed and they had done this thing that had really put me out. But of course they don't. People can't read our minds. They have no idea. They think, oh, she said yes, so she's happy to do it. So now the way that I would behave, or the way that I do behave, is to say to them, oh, look, first of all, one of the things I like to do is to say a time period. So I can say, oh, sure, yeah, I can help you move house, but only between 2 and 4 on Sunday, because otherwise, you can get there and then you can stay and you can feel resentful. And I like to be prepared. Like, I like to know, what's happening beforehand. So if I say that, then I'm not going to be there or waiting for them at 10 p.m. at night, or so on. So I sort of set that boundary. Or I'll say to them, oh, I'm really sorry, like this week is swamped. I'm not able to do it. Perhaps you could seek help from this removalist company or this one. Like, often I like to show resources as well. So you're still being helpful. You're just sort of saying, well, I can't do it, unfortunately, but here's some others who might be able to. Obviously not passing the buck to other people in the family, but instead,
Yeah.
like, recommending some professionals they could hire and so on. Or, I could say to them that unfortunately I can't help, basically just being very honest now. I think I wasn't honest before. I would just want them to read my mind, and I would really shut down, and after I performed the task for them, I would then avoid them and not pick up their calls and stuff, because I was still simmering in resentment and rage and wanting them to know that they had upset me. And instead they're just like, oh, she runs hot and cold. How do they understand what's happening with me if I'm not honest? So even now, when my voice shakes, when I'm scared witless, when I'm not sure like how they will react, I still keep working on that, being honest, just practicing what to say, going in there. And I think that what we were talking about before as well, of like creating that time as well to think about it. Often people call, and I always used to hate when they would call and say, can I ask you a favor? Because I was always people please, and I wouldn't know how to say no. So of course I hated the question. But it wasn't their issue, it was mine. It was that I didn't know how to say no in a loving way, and I didn't know how to say, oh, let me think about that, or let me check my calendar and get back to you, so that I had time to think about, was it convenient to me? Did I have the ability to do it this week? Is there a time period that would be handy for me? Or if they wanted me to pick something up, could I do it in conjunction with another chore that would make it more easy for me? That giving myself that time and space to consider what my response will be, instead of being put on the spot simply because it was their choice. What's that saying that they say, something like someone else's emergency or someone else's urgency does not create my emergency, something like that,
Yes.
where it's like, okay, just because they've decided that it's urgent for them doesn't mean I need to drop everything in my life to accommodate,
To be helpful. The sort of it's the curse of the being helpful, isn't it? It's such a heavy weight.
Yes.
And it's so important that, like, actually often the things that come up and stress us out and are urgent are because somebody else has said they're urgent rather than they're important to us. Obviously there's some real life stuff in there, sometimes there's work and blah, blah, blah. But it's interesting how much we could buy ourselves time, actually. What about if this, sometimes we hear, like, if this kind of toxic family members, say, or old relationships where, people have been benefiting from us not having those boundaries, and can give us a really hard time, because we do come up with people like that, don't we? How can we then, so if we've said, actually, I really can't because and they try to make us feel bad, throw the toys out of the cot, give us the silent treatment, if some of those behaviors that can be tricky kind of go, or painful, come up, what then?
I think one of the most powerful things is to have some sort of mantra where you are reminding yourself that their reaction belongs to them, that it doesn't matter how they react. All that matters is like how we respond bond, that we only have control over ourselves, not over how someone else responds to it. And often the people who did benefit from us having no boundaries are the ones who will act up when we first start enforcing them or communicating them. And that's okay. Just remember that their reaction is their own. They need to feel proud of themselves in the way that they respond, just the same as we need to feel proud of ourselves. So again, like walking away while they behave like that and say, or repeating, like I often repeat the boundary as well again, to be like, oh, I can see you're upset about it, but I must, I actually can't come over every Friday night or something like that. And reinforcing it and then allowing space. So like taking yourself away while they calm down and sort of have their reaction to your boundary, and then coming back together later, like just thinking that, okay, they might be responding in a way that served them in the past, that was their sort of behavior of like expecting others to be at their beck and call, and now they need to learn that that's not always the case. So I guess again, allowing that compassion for them to have their own learning experience within the conflict as well.
I love that. And I remember that, when we stop drinking, and we're trying to tell people, I always remember you saying, and I can't remember when it was, but you sort of said, compassion for self because change is hard, and compassion for them because change is hard. And that's such a beautiful, because, as soon as you've got that kind of slightly, you can breathe a little bit more. Again, it's that it's almost that we're all doing the best we can.
Yeah, exactly.
And other things trigger things, and this, that, and the other. And it's just like, okay, if we can just take a breath and look after ourselves. And I love what you said about their reactions are theirs, and all we can control is our own reactions. And how I don't think we've really taught that as, oh God, I could speak to you all day. I've just noticed the time. That thing is, when we're carers and as women, we're often not, there's a gender piece that we're not encouraged to do that. So that can feel even more tricky. And I just say that, I know if you have families with extra needs in them, that sort of, those boundaries can feel really skewed sometimes, and the need to sort of sometimes get external help, whether you have somebody to talk to that is not part of the family system, or you get the specialist, some charity support or something like that, when boundaries are really tricky for other reasons. Often I find it's about broadening the base as well, just anything that takes the sort of intensity out of it almost.
Exactly. So like whether it's mediation, whether it's having another person weigh in if you can't get to that sort of resolution, or if it is, there are so many complicated factors where that boundary is skewed. Yeah, I love that. Just sort of expanding, again, in a way that's sort of making space, but in a different way. So making space for more opinions, or more sort of more of a weigh in from others as well.
Yeah. And I know I was thinking even like our sober communities, we're having that appropriate support to mirror back our good choices, to mirror back the strengths, the evidence, so that again, like it's all part of the building that solid ground, isn't it, that we were talking about early on, the evidence and the capacity and the strength to be able to hold our boundaries and look after ourselves.
Exactly, that confidence. It takes a lot of work to build that, and we do it by just one little tiny building block at a time, by making our bed, by doing something that is good for us. And the more we sort of build that, and then having these difficult conversations, the more we feel confident, the more we feel self-worth, and ultimately the happier we are, because we fully accept and love ourselves as a result.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Bex. It's been amazing to speak to you.
It's been so good. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I do. I love your books. I love Chameleon, and I just think it feels timely for me, 100%. And I do think it is that, like you say, the layers of the onion that underneath so much of our drinking was this subject. How we love ourselves, how we connect with others, and how we do that without sacrificing, and I remember, in just to finish your little forward, you said, for anyone who has abandoned themselves, I wish you the magic and joy of finding your way back to yourself. And that, for me, is what sobriety in this journey is. And I think you've summed it up so beautifully.
Oh, thank you so much.
So thank you, Bex. If you're immediately concerned about your drinking, just reach out, send up a flare to us, info@lovesober.com. Soberistas has the anonymous Ask the Doctor service. You can find Bex at sexysobriety.com. And just sort of send up the flare, find where your fit is as well. Lots of sober communities out there now. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week for more chat.